Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay, and welcome back to Constantia. Well, you will have seen us over the last month or two a couple of times, and I'm particularly fond of Constantia because although I now call the wine hub that is Johannesburg home, the Cape was my university base, and then life was spent here for the better part of a decade thereafter. And my home in Cape Town was just up the road from Constantia, not quite the sprawling palaces that many Constantialites live in, but close enough to get down particularly to the wine estates. And a wine estate I'd spend a lot of time at was one I got to love through two of their wines in particular. One of my best mates, Andy, has a wife who exists almost entirely on Buitenverwachting Blanc, the famous white blend of Constantia. And then one of my favourite restaurants, a little pizza spot, Barusso's down in Kenilworth. The Mayfort was our regular every time we dropped by for a pizza. So I've spent a lot of time coming down here to taste wine, to buy some wine, and then more recently spent some time at the Cape Wine Auction. But I haven't been back there since then. I'm back here today, and with good reason, because a good mate of mine has taken over the restaurant here, which has seen its stock soar. And so I thought, well, something to eat and a glass of wine might be a good idea. Peter Tempelhoff, welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine.
Thank you, Dan. Nice to be here. Great to be here.
And great to be a place where I wouldn't have expected you to be a year ago, because you've been in a whole lot of different spots. We've seen you in Fane, and gee, it's a fabulous spot. That rundown little bed and breakfast at Element House, you spent some time as well. Tell us about finding yourself here at Buitenverwachting.
Yeah, I know. A year ago, I would never have imagined to be here either. But, you know, with this COVID came a lot of opportunities, and this is one of them. It was something I should have probably thought twice about it, but I didn't. Most people would have run a mile when they said you want to open a restaurant in the middle of a pandemic. But, you know, with the backing that we had from Lars, the owner, and our partners on board, they just really made it possible. So it's great to be here, back in my old haunt, because, you know, I used to be a greenhouse for a decade.
Which was where I first had your food. I was sitting quietly in a corner, hoping I could afford the bill for the dinner I'd bought my date out to, and thankfully just scraped by. But I've always really enjoyed the food that you've had. And for many reasons, but particularly because there's always such a sense of adventure and excitement with your food, and it speaks to the cooking heritage and the experiences that you've had. For people who don't know the Peter Tempelhoff story quite so well, give us the snapshot biopic of how the cooking started and how it's led to here today.
It actually started in Stellenbosch in 1997. Where I worked started studying at the ICA, and did that for 2 years. Then from there I worked at the Grand Roche Hotel, which was at the time the top hotel restaurant in the country, actually in Africa. It was part of the Relay, it was a Relay Gourmand. So it was really exciting for me to start my career there. Then from there I went to England, and I worked for a couple top chefs. One of them was Mark White, the notorious madman in the kitchen, the only guy that made Gordon Ramsay cry, apparently.
Did he make Peter Tempelhoff cry?
No, he tried. But there I was for 7 years, in England, in London for 5, and then outside London for 2, and then I came back and started Grand Provence at Franschhoek. Took over there for a couple of years, and then I went to the collection, which was, the greenhouse was part of the collection. I was there for just over a decade. And then I ventured on my own. I had an opportunity and opened Fane, and yeah, it's been good. It was a good 1 year. And then COVID came along.
It is a terrific restaurant, and if people have been to it, they might think, well, hang on, I've eaten Peter's food at Fane. During that quick recollection, he didn't mention all the time he'd spent in Japan, because clearly he must have, given the nature of the food. Yeah. There is such a strong Far Eastern element to your cooking. Where does that stem from? I
think it started at Grand Roche. You know, the late Frank Zlomka, he worked in Singapore, and I think he worked in Japan as well, and he had a lot of these flavors coming through his cuisine, which kind of at a young age, even before I started chefing, I enjoyed the umami aspect of soy sauces, and, you know, like sushi, of course, like most South Africans. But it wasn't until I worked in the Grand Roche kitchen that I realized there's way more to it, with all the dashies and everything, and it's kind of stuck with me my whole career. And in England, I'd never worked in Japanese restaurants, and it's only when I got back here, I was working with Liz McGraw. She sent me to Tokyo in 2008. I fell in love with the place instantly. I love the precise way they do their food, their ethos of, you know, if it's not best, then we don't want it. And it just resonated with me, and I've just had a fascination with the country and the people ever since. I don't know Japanese yet. We're not working on it either. I know my business partner, Ashley, he's studying Japanese. He's also quite fascinated by it. Yeah, so, and it's a kind of food that I've always cooked in my career, and it's always been, to me, like one of the healthiest ways to eat. It's one of the freshest cuisines, and I've always kind of gravitated towards like eating lighter and eating healthier, but still packed full of umami. I think Japanese food ticks all the boxes. Yeah.
I think what you do, that clean and fresh feel, you interpret so well. And I remember a particular meal you made for us at Element House last week that my wife still keeps trying to get me to make. And of course, it's way beyond anything I could ever imagine. But it's one I remember so clearly for that freshness, that cleanliness. But also because what you do so well is you take that Japanese base, but you then mix and match, you play it into the other styles that you've encountered and come up with, I think, what the culinary experts call Tempelhoffian.
Or Africanese, or Jafrican. Yeah, no, it's, I'm not Japanese, so I wouldn't want to bastardize their food too much by calling it pure Japanese. I am 100% proudly South African, even though I was born overseas. And I'd like to, and where we're cooking, you got to have a sense of place. So we can't just be a Japanese restaurant. It's a very South African restaurant where we use all South African, well, mostly South African ingredients, but we have this line, this Japanese kind of flavor running through everything. So it's not a strictly Japanese restaurant at all. But yeah, just it's kind of my own style of food. I enjoy doing it. You know, we're bringing in like a lot of, it's probably a good way to term it is probably South African food. Most people cook South African like with an Italian or French techniques. We're just using Japanese techniques to cook South African food.
Well, if you haven't been to Fane, you do need to, because it's a wonderful, wonderful experience. It's an experience that's not just the food, it's also a great wine list, and I've enjoyed some terrific wine there. And that's why we find ourselves here at Buitenverwachting, to see how the wine and the food shape up. We're going to be eating a little later, but I want to start with the wine. And for somebody who's clearly mildly obsessed with Japan, you'd think, okay, well, he probably just drinks sake by the bucket load. What's the Peter Tempelhoff wine story?
No, listen, I love my wine. I spend a lot of time, you know, tasting wine, tasting food, going back and forth till I find the right balance. I think the wine and the food really has to have a certain amount of balance. You can't have one overpowering the other one. So when I'm tasting, doing a little tasting, I make sure that one doesn't lead. They kind of just marry nicely in your mouth. And I think, you know, we've got 3 great wines today. They're all the flagship, well, the Christine's the flagship red, and then we've got 2 very interesting whites in here. One is a Sauvignon Blanc, which has been wooded, and then this one is a Gewürztraminer, which I think works amazingly well with umami and soyas and kind of Japanese flavors because it's very aromatic. So this one in particular is really good at that kind of food. But Beyond isn't that kind of food. Beyond is different. You know, we do have a couple Japanese elements through the menu, but we've gone back a little bit. We said, you know, when I first stepped into the kitchen in London was Marco Pure White's Quo Vadis, and this menu and this food is kind of taking me back to where I started, and a la carte menu, and you know, kind of just taking really good ingredients and not doing too much to them, getting them on a plate, but marrying it with the perfect sauce and little ingredients on the plate. So I think that kind of cooking, it really bodes well for wine. You can actually taste the product, which is the meat or the fish, better with the wine if you have less frivolities around it, so to speak.
I'm particularly excited about trying the Gewürztraminer because it's not something we get a huge amount of here in South Africa. Just before we do kick in, tell me about the challenge of setting up a restaurant within the confines of a wine estate. If you're setting up a Fane, it's right, what does Peter want to make? Right, and then we'll find some wine and go with it. Now, I'd imagine it's slightly different because you've got this set of wines here at the estate, and you'd like to, if not directly pair, then certainly provide fare that can play off that wine pretty well.
Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, the great thing about Baton is Lars Jan hasn't put me under any like limitations of what we can have on the wine list. You know, we're a tenant here, so we can do pretty much, you got a bug in your shirt, there we go. We can do pretty much what you want on the wine list. But having said that, we've got 15% of the wines, 10, 15 are Buitenverwachting, and the other 85, 90% are other wines from other estates, but the sales are 85% Baton and like 15% of the other wines. So people want to drink the wine when they come here. So we need to, you know, we have to make sure that the food pairs well to the Baton wines. And it's just a joy doing it. It's nice to be able to cook food to wine that's been made right here. You know, all the grapes are grown here. You can look out the kitchen window. You can pick, like right now we have some Sauvignon Blanc on the cheese platter. You know, we're using it where we can. We use the vine leaves as much as we can. And it's a great thing. It's just talking about where you are, sense of place. And I think that's what food is about as well. You want to be eating where you are.
Oh, I love it. Just speaks to terroir in every possible level. All right, well, let's try some wine then.
Cool.
The first of these, the Gewürztraminer. It's one of those wines where I think when you can start to pronounce it properly, if you're not German, you've probably had enough and should go home.
You do pronounce it well. You can stay.
It's also one of those wines when you, on the nose, oh my, I'm going to get diabetes if I drink this because it is so sweet, and then it gets onto your palate and you discover it's actually something really different.
Amazing, amazing. Very floral on the nose. Typical Gewürz on the nose, but palate very dry, austere. So you get a nice finish, a kind of savory finish almost.
Almost a tiniest little hint of spritz to it, and it doesn't last on too long, so it gives you that sort of steely, dryish white, but still quite a bit of fruit in there as well.
It's a great food wine.
I was telling you that.
There's a little salinity at the back there. It works really well with soy sauces and ponzus and misos.
So if I am onto the menu at Beyond, which I'm going to be a little later on today, what sits on the menu there that would work with this?
We actually just put a new sashimi plate on. Yeah, so it's the tuna season's just starting. So we got some amazing tuna and some yellowfin. They're running in by Simonstown right now. So we got some fresh false-based yellowtail, and then we got some. What else do we have on there? We got some white fish tartare, and then we got a really cool. We made like a ponzu out of shiso, and then we added a bit of. It's actually a kaishi, so it's more like a dipping sauce. You dip noodles in normally. We've turned it into a sauce for a sashimi, so it's quite interesting. Got a bit of dashi in there, a bit of smoked fish flavors. Yeah, so
I need to stop you there because I've seen how sushi is supposed to work in South Africa. You're supposed to have 2 salmon roses, 4 California rolls, 2 pieces of nigiri, and 2 pieces of sashimi.
lots of mayo everywhere.
All over the place. And then somebody who looks vaguely Asian standing in the corner somewhere attempting to put it all together.
Yes, South African bubblegum sushi. It's
It's not quite so bad now, but there was a phase where every restaurant in the country had a sushi bar. So steakhouse and sushi, and Italian and sushi, and it became a bit of a pastiche after.
Well, we've taken the rice away, and we've done a sashimi plate. So it's just raw fish. One of them's tataki, so it's seared on the outside. One of them is a tartare, and the other one's a slightly steamed prawn, and then you have a piece of like actual sashimi, so raw fish. So it's not completely sushi. It's kind of a bastardized version of raw fish.
I often wonder what Japanese chefs would think of if they walked into a couple of our little sushi
No, they wouldn't be impressed, eh? No, I had a 2-star chef with me, Shin Takagi, and he did a couple dinners with me at Fane. And we wanted to have dinner at Fane one night, and it was his first night here, and we're serving the menu with our Japanese kind of style to it, and I felt so uneasy with this Japanese guy sitting next to me. Like every dish, like, oh, what's he going to think of it? But you know what? He loved it because it's not completely Japanese. It's our kind of version of it, and yeah, I think it's. Yeah.
And I think chefs appreciate the work and the art.
Yeah, the effort that goes into it, and your kind of signature, your kind of take on their food. We don't call it. I didn't call it Japanese to him. I just said it's just South African food.
All right, you've sold me on the sashimi and my Gewürztraminer.
Yeah.
Oh, that is very nice. Okay, wine number 2. Now this is a valley that is celebrated for its Sauvignon Blanc. There are fewer better places in the world for the sheer quality of Sauvignon Blanc. This is Sauvignon Blanc with a slight twist.
So this is the Maximus. I forget which vintage it is. It's a 2019. Okay, so this has seen some new French oak, 20% new oak for I think it was 18 months, and the rest is 80% oak. So it's a Blanc Fumé basically, a wooded Sauvignon Blanc, I guess you call it. And again, because of the wood component, it's added a lot of mouthfeel, a lot of complexity to it, nice finish. So again, it marries really well in particular into creamy fish dishes. So like a fish with a creamy sauce, that's the one. Yeah.
Do I find a fish with a creamy sauce on
Well,
the
we
menu?
do, but then what are you going to have with the red wine?
Oh.
So in the beginning, you get a Sauvignon Blanc hint on the nose.
Yeah.
Like you picked it up earlier.
Yeah.
Like you almost second guessed yourself, but you didn't. But then you get that wooded, you got that real woody, and it kind of throws you off a bit. And then on the palate, I think it's a bit deceiving. It's not like your typical Sauvignon Blanc. It's austere and like fresh. This is kind of just blended nicely into the wood, you know.
And it does rush all over the palate. It doesn't leave anything unexposed, and it's got a beautiful, rich, almost slightly waxy finish when it's done.
Yeah, it's a real nice wine. It's put together so well by Brad. Brad, the winemaker, has been here making some really good wine for a little while now.
And it's also, I love this because at the moment the wine we talk about so much, and I think rightfully in South Africa, is Chenin and Chenin-led blends, and they do wonders with so much food and for South African wine abroad. But as you say, when you're making food, a Sauvignon Blanc, unwooded style, out of Constantia, fabulous, sunshine, beautiful. But this just gives you that extra dimension, which for you as a chef opens up a whole lot more.
Yeah, I think plain Sauvignon Blanc unwooded is quite limiting. You can only do it with a few salads and some raw fish now and then. But this one, like you said, it opens up a whole new level of flavors you can bring into it. Because of the wood, you can add some cream to it, and it'll take a little bit of butter. And yeah, it just reminds me of like almost a voluptuous Chenin almost. It's like really got that character, like apricots at the end, and really good job on this wine, I must say. It took me a while to warm towards it because I didn't know what category to put it in. But now that I understand it a bit more, it's a fantastic wine. I love cooking with it. No, cooking for it.
Yeah, it actually reminds me, it wasn't that long ago, I was doing a vertical tasting with Ken Forrester and his FMCs, and obviously very different wines, but the finish is very similar, that richness and that smoothness. And
a bit of like orange stone fruits in there as well.
Yeah.
That's great.
Oh, all right, well, we've got two terrific whites here. We also have a red, and I always feel that the Constantia reds generally can be exceptional, but because the Sauvignon Blanc and the Sauvignon Semillon blends are both A, so good, and B, so renowned, people tend to drink those and then head off to a Vin de Constance or similar, and often miss the red when there's a lot that the red does have to offer.
I think so. Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you compare Bordeaux to Constantia, which you should because it's a great Sauvignon producing region, then surely they should do Cab Sauv very well, or the other great varietals from Bordeaux. So I think this is a Cab Franc, heavy blend, and you would think this is Bordeaux climate, so it's got to do well here.
Yeah.
But I think they're hidden gems, especially these ones. You get the older ones, these will sit in the bottle for 20, 30 years. We've got some we managed to get into cellars, Lars's private cellar stock, and he's given us a 93 and a 96, I think. So we've got a few older vintages on the wine list, and they're drinking amazingly well now.
Immediately that Cab Franc just rushes
Just
out of the glass, doesn't it?
Yeah, that pencil and shavings. And
I often wonder who the person was who came up with that as a description, much used as it is now, who'd accidentally chewed their way through a pencil. Ooh, that reminds
Most
me
children.
of Cabernet Franc.
So the wine takes you back to your childhood, eh? More ways than one.
6-year-old wine tastings in the Nickel household 30 years ago. And it's lovely, and yet this is 2014?
This is a 2014, yeah. And it's still got many years to go before it's ready, eh?
Not even started. It's still,
I know.
still so tight, still so linear, still a long way from opening up.
It's good body, but like you said, it's kind of still grippy on the tongue. The tannins haven't softened yet. But like I said, those 93s and 95s are drinking really well now. So I think this one, another 10 years, that's going to be a beaut. Really well balanced. And I think they're almost out of this one. I think the 2015 is going to be a beaut as well.
Yeah.
So the 2014 is their current vintage.
And worth remembering that as much as we talk about Stellenbosch for its 2015 year, Constantia was just as good.
Yeah, amazing.
We'll have a lot to offer. I'd be very happy to put a case of this away and wait for 10, 15 years. But if I had to be drinking it now, it's got that tightness. It hasn't quite opened up yet, but there's still some lovely Cabernet Franc in that. What are you serving with this right now?
Well, I'd probably decant that to begin with. Give it a couple hours in a decanter, and then I'd serve it with just cries beef. It does, but I think I would do it with the Springbok. I know. I think I'd definitely do
smoke on that venison.
Yeah, and I'd grill the Springbok as well. But it worked great with. That'd be great with a fillet, or maybe a sirloin, a bit more fat to it. Yeah, because it's got good acidity.
Yeah, that's going to cut through. Even a ribeye, you've got that marbling.
Got lots of tannin for that. For the meatiness.
Yeah. maybe that 3 kilogram slab Wagyu you said.
Oh yeah, now you're talking.
Oh dear.
That'd be great with Wagyu actually. That's a good call.
There we go.
Yeah, I think we sorted your lunch out.
Speaking of lunch, before we wrap up, because I know you've got to get back to the kitchen and I need to start eating because I've had a bit of wine now and I'm anxious to continue my day of indulgence. I often ask people in the wine industry to go back and recall their single greatest bottle of wine, glass of wine. Often it comes down to experience as much as the wine itself. Given that you are an acclaimed chef who's travelled the world, I'll tweak it ever so slightly. If you could go back and repeat one particular meal that you had, not necessarily one that you cooked, maybe it was one that you ate yourself at a restaurant, a country you visited, is there a particular one that still makes you weak at the knees?
There's a couple, but I think one that changed the course of my life was the one that Raymond Blanc cooked. So Raymond Blanc, the 2 Michelin star chef from Oxford, he's got Le Manoir 4 Saisons, which is a Relais Chateau property. He was flown out in 1997 to come cook a dinner. He was actually at the Good Food Show back then, so he came out as a guest speaker, and he was staying at the Grand Roche Hotel because it was a Relais Chateau as well, and he did a couple dinners there. So I managed to get a couple tickets, and I went to go eat in the main ballroom or the main dining room at Grand Roche. And it was quite the event because back then it was all tablecloths and silverware and like 5 different knives and forks on each side, all that. But the food that he came out with that day it blew my mind. It was then I realized that I'm in the right industry. I've made the right choice to become a chef, and I remember each dish like exactly how I ate it back then, and it's still kind of sunk in my mind as the greatest meal I've ever had. But there was a meal in Japan which is pretty close. It was a small little 8-seater restaurant, Kaiseki, and it was pretty close. Even though they couldn't speak a word of English, that comes a close second. Yeah.
Japan is one of the most extraordinary places I visited for a number of reasons, but the food in particular, and of course not just Japanese, you can go to all manner of Michelin-starred restaurants across the city. But in the terms of our conversation, what I love about it is how it's influenced but not dictated the food that you make, and allowed us to come and revel in the meals that you give us. So thank you, not just for today and for the wine, for the lunch I'm about to head off to, but also for all the great meals you've given so many of us over the years, and to many, many more to come.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's great to be on your show, and thanks for inviting me, and yeah, we'll see you in the restaurant.
All right, well, I'm going to decant all of these into one big glass and have some rosé before I head off to lunch. If you haven't been down the Constantia Valley, then getting through to Buitenverwachting is highly recommended on Dan's list of very cool places to go. The wine is fantastic. They've got a whole range, and I'm sure you've come across some of them before, but do make some time. Drop it at Beyond. Tell Peter Tempelhoff that Dan sent you, and you'll be absolutely guaranteed to be overcharged by at least 50%.